Hey guys, tonight we begin our journey in the middle of nowhere, well nearly. Picture a flat, dry stretch of Western Australia in the early 1930s, where the air smells like baked earth and wheat chaff, and the only thing louder than the cicadas is the sound of your own skeptical thoughts. You're about to walk straight into one of history's most bizarre and bird-brain conflicts. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, not because of gunfire or gore, but because you'll likely collapse in confusion trying to understand how a bunch of emus outwitted the Australian military. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1932. And you find yourself wandering through Campion, a speck of a town sitting out in the wheat belt of Western Australia. It's hot, it's dry, and you're already regretting your life choices. The wheat fields stretch to the horizon, but they're not looking too happy. Half of them are stunted by drought, and the rest are being chewed on by creatures you haven't seen yet, but can definitely smell. The farmers here are mostly veterans from the First World War, blokes who fought in the trenches of Gallipoli and the Somme, only to return home and be told, good news, you get to be farmers now. The government had promised them land and prosperity. What they got instead was soil like powdered rock, rabbit plagues, and a deeply unsatisfying relationship with wheat prices. You trudge along a dusty fence line and spot the first sign of things to come. Enormous, three-toed footprints in the dirt, spaced like something had been running, and fast. Up ahead, a man shouts and waves a shovel at something unseen. Then you hear it. Not quite a chirp, not a roar either. More like a low, guttural thrum-thrum that vibrates in your chest. You freeze. Suddenly, a blur of brown feathers and long legs rockets past you at 30 miles per hour. It's taller than you. It stares at you sideways as it zooms by, like you're the one out of place here. It's an emu, and it has absolutely zero respect for your personal space. Now, here's a quick fact to keep you grounded. Emus are Australia's second largest native bird species, after the cassowary. They're flightless, yes, but don't let that fool you. These birds are built for survival. With powerful legs, keen senses, and a strong herd instinct, they migrate in massive groups across the plains, always in search of food and water. And unfortunately for Western Australian wheat farmers, that migration route just so happens to pass right through their livelihoods. Every year, like feathered hurricanes, the emus come rolling in, thousands of them, tens of thousands. Some accounts place the number as high as 20,000 birds sweeping down from the north. You climb onto the back of a flatbed truck to get a better view, and there they are on the horizon, an endless wave of brown bobbing heads and feathery bodies, hopping, running, kicking up dust like a stampede from a fever dream. Get off the road! Someone yells, and you barely dodge a group of 6 birds galloping in a tight formation. You blink. Did one of them just nod at you? Hard to say. Historians still argue whether these birds moved in coordinated packs or just followed each other like feathery sheep. Either way, the result was the same. Total agricultural chaos. It's not just that the emus eat the wheat, although they do that with impressive enthusiasm. It's also that they trample the young crops, knock down fences, and leave gates swinging open for rabbits to pour in behind them. You visit one homestead where the fence looks like it lost a fight with a monster truck, except the truck was full of birds. Some farmers try to fend them off with shovels, others try to shoot them with old rifles, but most quickly realize they're woefully outnumbered. You help an elderly vet try to shoo a group of emus off his porch, only for them to stare blankly at you while plucking buttons off his coat. At night, the wind carries strange sounds, snorts, rustles, that same low, resonant drumming noise. It's not menacing exactly, just surreal. You lie in your cot, listening to the rhythmic thunk of birds stepping on tin roofing, and wonder what in the world you've walked into. And here's a strange tidbit you overhear in the pub. Someone swears the emus communicate using low-frequency rumbles that humans can't hear, but can feel. One bloke insists his fillings vibrate whenever they pass. Is it true? Who knows? But after that day, You start sleeping with a pillow over your head. The tension is building. The farmers are furious. The government, already under pressure due to the Great Depression, can't ignore the escalating complaints. You sip your beer in a dim-lit bar and listen to a man read aloud from a letter he's sending to the Minister of Defense. He's dead serious. He wants military intervention. Military. Against birds. You chuckle into your drink, but no one else is laughing. Then the bartender leans in and says, "They're actually considering it." You wake up the next morning to the clink of metal and the scent of dry tobacco. Out in the dusty road, a group of farmers is gathered, arms crossed, eyes red, not from drink, but from the constant frustration of battling birds that refuse to play fair. One man, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, reads aloud from a crumpled telegram. He reads it twice. No one moves. The government has responded. It begins politely enough. "We understand your concerns." The usual political preamble, but then it turns strange. They're sending the army, with Lewis guns. The group bursts into scattered whoops and backslaps. You just stand there blinking. Did you hear that right? The same military hardware used in the trenches of France is now being deployed to protect wheat fields from emus? Let's rewind a bit. After the First World War, Australia had promised returning soldiers parcels of farmland, a chance at a new life. But the land they were given wasn't exactly prime real estate. A mix of rocky soil, unpredictable rainfall, and locust swarms made for grim prospects. And then came the emus. By 1932, wheat prices had collapsed due to the global depression. The government had promised subsidies, but failed to deliver. So these soldiers, these battle-tested men who'd once fought with bayonets in mud and blood, found themselves facing bankruptcy because of a bunch of 6-foot birds. And they weren't exactly subtle in their demands. They wanted action. Military action. You hitch a ride in a rickety Model T with one of the more talkative farmers. He tells you, between coughs, that the wheat harvest has dropped by over 30% because of the birds. They run like the devil, he mutters, fast as a car, and they travel in gangs. Gangs, I tell you. He's not wrong. Emus are social and mobile. During migration, they don't just pass through, they linger. They stomp. They snack. They multiply. You pass another field and count at least 50 of them lounging under a windmill like they've booked a weekend getaway. And here's a mainstream fact worth knowing. Emus can live up to 20 years and thrive in harsh environments. Their thick plumage keeps them cool, and their legs, strong enough to disembowel a predator with a single kick, are built for relentless motion. Back in town, posters are going up. The birds must go. Protect our wheat. Call in the guns. There's even talk of a newspaper organizing a feather drive to raise awareness. You can't decide if it's patriotism or parody. Then there's the fringe detail you overhear at the train station. A local swears he saw an emu wearing a tin can on its head like a helmet. He claims they're evolving. Another man nods solemnly, completely serious, and says, "They learn from every encounter." You smirk, but deep down, part of you wonders, because the government's about to take this deadly seriously. The Minister of Defense at the time was Sir George Pierce, a man who'd rather not be dealing with a bird-based crisis. But under pressure, and perhaps with a bit of a smirk himself, he agrees to deploy a small detachment of soldiers, with the condition that the farmers provide food, accommodation, and transport. Historians still argue whether Pierce saw it as a genuine operation or just a political bone tossed to quiet rural voters. Was it a public relations stunt, a real military intervention, or a glorified pest control mission? No one quite agrees. But the guns were real, and they were on their way. You're there at the rail yard when they arrive. 2 Lewis machine guns, 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and Major G.B.W. Meredith, an officer with a clipped mustache and a deeply skeptical squint. He does not look thrilled. Alongside him are 2 gunners from the Royal Australian Artillery. They climb down from the train with the practiced boredom of men who've seen worse. Still, you catch one of them muttering, "Didn't expect to fight livestock this week." The arrival is strangely ceremonial. A few farmers cheer. One hands Meredith a jug of water and thanks him like he's just shown up to save a village. The major gives a slow nod and says only, "Where are the birds?" You point. He squints at the horizon, where 100 feathery heads bob, like a field of sentient scarecrows. By nightfall, the soldiers are billeted at a nearby farmhouse. You watch them clean the Lewis guns with care, their movements automatic and oddly graceful. The weapons were designed during World War I, air-cooled, capable of firing 500 to 600 rounds per minute. Brutal in close combat. Slightly ridiculous for birds. Still, they have orders. And so do you, apparently. The farmers draft you into observation duty. Your job is simple. Sleep lightly and count birds at dawn. You lie in a canvas cot that creaks with every shift. Outside, a soft breeze stirs the eucalypts, and somewhere in the dark, a low booming sound rolls across the wheat fields. Thrum thrum. The birds are near. You close your eyes, and in the distance, you swear you hear one chuckle. You're up before dawn. The wheat fields are soaked in that grayish half-light where shadows stretch too long, and the breeze still smells like last night's dust. You crouch near a shed with 3 farmers and a soldier, all of you watching the tree line with held breath. Somewhere out there, the emus wait, or maybe they're already watching you. The first one steps into view like an actor hitting its mark. It stands tall and alert, feathers puffed slightly against the morning chill, scanning the field like a scout. Then another appears, and another. You nudge the man beside you, and he nods. They always send a few first. Recon birds. You're not sure if he's joking. Within an hour, the recon unit has become a full-fledged invasion. Hundreds, no thousands, of emus surge forward, a mass of bobbing heads and rapid, jerking strides. Their legs blur, claws kicking up dirt in rhythmic thuds. The ground almost seems to vibrate. You'd expect chaos, but instead, it's oddly organized. The emus don't clump, they fan out, weaving through fence gaps and darting between hay bales. It's not just migration, it's maneuver. Back at the farmhouse, you find Major Meredith seated at a wooden table littered with maps, reports, and 2 leftover pieces of toast. He's heard the sightings. It's go time. He chooses the location for the first assault, a watering hole near Campion. A perfect ambush site, narrow approach, limited cover, and supposedly a high-traffic zone for the birds. You all pile into an open back truck loaded with ammo and rusty optimism. And here's your mainstream historical fact. The first official engagement of the Emu War took place on November 2nd, 1932. The plan? Wait by the water and let the birds come to you. After all, what could go wrong? Turns out, quite a lot. You and the rest of the ambush crew settle into position under the rising sun. The Lewis guns are set up on tripods. Soldiers lie flat in the grass, squinting through scopes. Farmers whisper excitedly behind hay bales. You steady your breath. Then you hear it. The telltale thump-thump-thump of feet approaching fast. And then silence. The birds have stopped. You peek over the ridge. The emus are standing just out of range, milling about like tourists unsure which exit leads to the gift shop. A few seem to look directly at you. One of them actually tilts its head, like it's judging your ambush technique. Then, all at once, they bolt in opposite directions, scatter like marbles on tile. The gunners panic. Shots are fired. The Lewis gun chatters to life with that unmistakable roar, the barrel shaking violently as bullets tear into the dust behind the birds. You cover your ears as the field erupts in noise. And the emus? They're gone. Vanished. Melted into the bush like ghosts. When the dust settles, the tally is grim. Perhaps a dozen birds down at best. Over 100 rounds spent. Your ears ringing. Your nose full of gunpowder, and your pride in tatters. A farmer stares at the smoking gun. They're too fast, he says in quiet awe. They juke. You spend the rest of the day helping reload and reposition. Another attempt is made that afternoon, this time with the gun mounted on the back of the truck. The idea is simple. Chase them. Catch up. Blast them while they run. The reality? It's a circus. The truck, bouncing wildly across uneven paddocks, can barely keep pace. Every time the gunner lines up a shot, the truck jolts over a rock or a rabid burrow. The Lewis gun jams. Twice. The emus dart into shrubs and vanish like avian smoke. And here's a delightful fringe tidbit. One of the soldiers claims an emu turned back mid-chase, stared directly at him, and then winked before darting into the bush. You laugh, but 3 men nod seriously. They know. One of them whispers. They absolutely know. You return to camp with sunburned arms and a mild concussion from hitting your head on the truck roof. Major Meredith paces silently for a long time, then mutters. They seem to be operating in units. Historians still argue whether emus acted with any real strategic coordination or if their erratic, unpredictable movements simply looked intelligent. One early observer described their formations as maddeningly efficient, while another insisted they were just dumb luck with feathers. Either way, the results speak for themselves. The first day of combat, and it's an avian shutout. That night, as you sit by a flickering campfire eating beans from a dented tin, one of the gunners tells a story from the war. The war, the real one. In the trenches, everything was chaos, but at least the enemy wore uniforms. At least the enemy didn't mock you with long-legged sprints and smug sideways glances. You nod solemnly. Then a shadow passes nearby. Everyone freezes. It's an emu. Just one, watching from behind a fence post. It stands there, framed by the firelight, head high, feathers ruffling gently in the breeze. And then, like a furry phantom, it steps backward into the dark. No sound, no rustle. Gone. You decide not to mention the glint of moonlight that might have looked like a medal on its chest. By now, the mood among the soldiers is tense. Not wartime tense. More like you just lost a board game to your 4-year-old nephew tense. No one's been wounded except for pride. And yet every face you pass wears the same hollow expression. The look of a trained adult who has been repeatedly outsmarted by a large, slightly goofy bird. You wake with the sun again, this time to a heated discussion at the edge of the field. Meredith stands with a cluster of farmers, one hand gripping a half-smoked cigarette, the other jabbing at a map, like he's trying to stab the birds through it. Today's plan? Smaller ambush teams. More mobility. Less predictability. In theory, it sounds reasonable. In practice, it's a mess. You're assigned to Team B, which consists of 1 gunner, 1 driver, and you, now officially deemed bird spotter, though it mostly feels like guy who gets pecked if things go wrong. Your new mission is to trail a small mob of emus moving westward through brushy terrain, track their habits, and radio coordinates for interception. You load up the truck. It's the same old rust bucket as yesterday, but now with added wire mesh to protect the radiator. Because yes, the emus learned to attack the truck. Mainstream fact, emus have been known to kick through light sheet metal when startled, and they will fight back when cornered. You bounce through scrubland all morning, following footprints and feathers, stopping occasionally to whisper into the hand-crank radio. The birds, of course, never seem to stop. They don't rest. They don't gather in shootable clumps. They run in staggered lines, pivot at weird angles, and seem to teleport through fences. Midday hits, and the heat turns from unpleasant to apocalyptic. Your shirt sticks to you like cling wrap. Flies swarm your eyes. The truck breaks down. Again, you sit on the hood and eat stale bread while 2 soldiers argue over whether emus can smell gunpowder. Of course they can. They're Australian. Eventually, a large group of birds is spotted near a windmill. This time, the plan is perfect. Surround them from 3 sides, push them into a kill zone, and let the Lewis gun do the rest. Everyone moves into position. You crouch low in the wheat, heartbeat fluttering like the grass around you. Then it happens. A sudden, fluttery burst of movement. The emus scatter, again, before a single shot is fired. It's like they heard the plan in advance. The gunner curses. Meredith yells into the wind. You leap up just in time to see one bird trip, roll, and then pop back up like a gymnast before sprinting away. It's annoying, yes, but also elegant. Here's a quirky detail you overhear later around the fire. One soldier claims the emus are using decoys, sending weaker birds out to draw fire, while the rest escape. Another swears he saw one emulate a limp until the gun jammed, then sprint off like an Olympian. Are they strategizing, or just chaotic geniuses? Historians still argue whether these behaviors were signs of learned avoidance or just coincidental patterns from panicked animals. One camp calls it emergent coordination. The other calls it sheer bloody luck. But to you, in the field, it sure feels intentional. By the end of the fourth day, you've clocked over 40 miles chasing birds, fired hundreds of rounds, and downed, maybe, a few dozen emus. The soldiers stop keeping exact numbers. The birds, meanwhile, don't seem bothered in the slightest. They're still out there, casually demolishing crops, sunbathing on hay bales, and occasionally kicking water troughs for fun. You start noticing signs that the farmers are losing faith. They don't say it directly, but you can see it in their eyes. When they pass the gunners without nodding, when they repair fences more slowly, when they mutter about doing it ourselves. In town, the news isn't kind. A journalist from the West Australian shows up, notebook in hand, and interviews a few of you under the pretense of supportive reporting. 2 days later, a story runs with the headline, "Birds blitzed? Not so fast." The article implies that perhaps the emus are winning. You gather in the back of the pub that evening, morale somewhere below sea level. Meredith slumps in a chair, tie undone, drinking something that smells like kerosene and regret. Someone cracks a joke about giving the birds voting rights. Another suggests negotiating peace. Then, a farmer storms in with a new problem. The birds have moved further inland, deeper into terrain too rough for trucks or guns. A new front. A harder one. Meredith pinches the bridge of his nose and mutters, "I've commanded troops in France, and this is still the most humiliating operation I've ever seen." You offer to go scout the new area in the morning, mostly because you need to do something. Anything. Your dreams that night are full of running legs, dusty feathers, and one emu with a monocle and a map. You wake up sore, sunburned, and suspiciously covered in wheat chaff that no one recalls placing on your cot. The air smells of scorched grain and wet canvas. You rub your eyes and remember your self-appointed scouting mission. After a quick breakfast of black tea and something that was once toast, you join Major Meredith, who's standing by the edge of a field, arms crossed, looking like he's calculating the probability of the earth just swallowing him whole. Today, he says, you're heading into rougher bushland, where emus are said to be gathering in large, roving mobs. The trucks are useless out there. It'll be on foot, slow going, through thick scrub, sand traps, and undergrowth dense enough to hide a circus. You pack a field kit, binoculars, a dull machete, some biscuits, a flask of water, and a coil of rope no one wants to explain. The soldiers are still in their canvas tents behind you, muttering about jamming bolts and busted gear. The Lewis guns are being cleaned again, not that it matters. Even the weapons are starting to look embarrassed. Your trek begins under a hazy sun. You move past the outermost farms, where fences lie in tatters and feed sacks have been shredded by claws or beaks or both. A scarecrow in one field has been completely disassembled, its hat now adorning the post like a surrender flag. A mile in, you start seeing signs, not of the birds themselves, but of their passage. Droppings, flattened underbrush, feathers stuck to bark. You pass a small trough half filled with muddy water, its sides scuffed with deep scratches. They're here, somewhere. Then you hear it, the rhythmic drumming sound you've come to dread. It's faint, distant, like a heartbeat in the earth itself. You drop low and peer through your binoculars. There, past the eucalypts, an emu, tall and still as a statue. Then 2 more. Then 30. They stand in a wide crescent, facing your direction, not moving, just watching. You lower the binoculars and blink. When you raise them again, they're gone. The bush is empty. The birds have evaporated. You check your pulse. Back at camp, you find Meredith poring over a field report. He gives you a nod, then sighs. They're splitting into smaller groups, too many to track, and moving faster than we can keep up. Here's a historical fact for you. The emus were migrating inland for the breeding season. The timing of the war, early November, coincided with their peak movement. That meant new mobs forming every day, as birds paired off, nested, and ran off in different directions. Also, emus don't mate quietly. One of the soldiers insists he heard what sounded like a didgeridoo echoing through the scrub. It was just an emu calling to its partner. And here's your fringe tidbit. One night by the fire, someone swears they saw two birds engaged in a kind of ceremonial dance. Not aggressive, not playful, something in between. They were mocking us, the soldier says, deadpan, like they were celebrating another win. Morale among the humans is sinking fast. Ammunition is low. The machine guns jam constantly in the dust. The trucks can't get through the terrain, and even the horses have begun to look suspiciously at the birds, as if contemplating defection. You pass Meredith arguing with a government official over the field radio. The conversation is a tangle of static, sighs, and thinly veiled sarcasm. No, I can't give you a casualty report. The birds aren't filing paperwork. Yes, I'm aware this is a military operation. No, we don't need reinforcements. We need dignity. Outside the tent, a soldier pins up the kill count on a chalkboard. It reads, emus, 987. Rounds fired, 9,860. You do the math. 10 bullets per bird. And those are the confirmed kills. Historians still debate whether the number is accurate or generous. Some believe the kill count was inflated to preserve morale. Others think it was underreported to downplay just how many rounds were wasted. Either way, the birds were winning the war of ratios. One afternoon, a visiting member of Parliament stops by, dressed in a wool suit and straw hat. He surveys the fields with the look of a man expecting to be impressed. Instead, he finds Major Meredith trying to fix a jammed Lewis gun with a spoon. The MP nods, politely confused, and later delivers a report to Parliament stating that the operation is ongoing and complex and probably not ideal. Back in the field, you hike to a ridgeline and spot a new mob, at least 50 strong, moving in a slow, undulating wave. They don't appear to be running this time. Instead, they seem to glide across the land, weaving through the grass with uncanny coordination. The gunner beside you sets up the tripod. You brace for another attempt. But before the first shot, the birds split. Just like that. A perfect divergence down two gullies. The gunner swears. They're flanking us, he mutters. And that's when you realize something strange. It's not just that the emus are hard to hit. It's that they never seem to panic. They flee, yes, but not randomly, not blindly. It's as though they know exactly where you'll be. Like they've studied the maps, too. You trek back to base in silence, chewing a stale biscuit, and wondering if this is what the early settlers felt like when they first met the kangaroo. Confused, defeated, slightly insulted. That night, around the fire, a soldier tells a joke that gets more laughs than it deserves. What's the difference between an emu and the Australian government? A pause. The emu knows how to run a campaign. By the time the first week of the Great Emu War crawls to its dusty, bird-filled conclusion, the vibe around camp has shifted. No more excited chatter. No more optimistic maps. Just the sound of someone repeatedly thumping a kettle against a rock in quiet protest. You help load the Lewis gun into the truck again, knowing full well it'll probably jam the moment the first feather shows up. Still, routine is comfort, even when the routine is failure. Today's mission is ambitious again. A large mob has been reported near a fallow wheat field just south of Walgulan. The plan is to intercept the group, fire in controlled bursts, and for once, not let all the birds escape in a flurry of dust and judgment. You climb into the truck, this time fitted with a new steel mount for the gun. The gunner looks slightly more confident than usual. Meredith rides up front, reading from a crumpled page that simply says, "Find the birds. Try not to be embarrassed." As you bump your way down the narrow farm track, you pass two broken fences, one torn water tank, and a sign that once said Wheatfield Lane, but now says just Eat La. The birds have even taken the signs. You're not sure if it's symbolic or just rude. Soon enough, the emus appear. A wave of them, dozens, maybe 100, coasting along the edge of the field like a parade you weren't invited to. They move fast, sure, but this time the truck is lined up just right. The gunner signals. The driver accelerates. And for once, everything works. The Lewis gun stutters to life, barking out a controlled stream of bullets. The lead emus scatter, but several stumble, feathers flying in plumes. One goes down. Then another. You almost cheer. Almost. Because then the truck hits a hole. The rear axle jumps like a startled wallaby. The gunner flies half out of the truck bed, clutching the side rail. The gun jams. Again. The driver curses so colorfully, he actually invents a new word. You hit the floor hard, cracking your biscuit tin. By the time the truck skids to a halt and everyone's gathered themselves, the field is empty, except for one emu standing far off near a tree, very still. You swear it bows, slightly before disappearing into the scrub. Later that afternoon, you regroup with the other teams. Everyone's got the same story. Small wins, followed by mechanical failure, followed by birds vanishing like smoke in a wind tunnel. And now comes the paperwork. Meredith, ever the reluctant scribe of this feathered farce, sits at a makeshift desk and writes the daily report. You peer over his shoulder and catch a few lines. Engaged flock of approximately 100 emus. Result, 12 confirmed kills. One gun jammed. Note, birds appear to be adapting in both movement and awareness. He pauses, sighs, and adds, morale, slightly better than yesterday. Still bad. Here's your historical fact. Lewis guns, while formidable in trench warfare, were notoriously unreliable in open environments with dust, sand, and constant jostling. In other words, exactly what the Australian outback provides in abundance. The fringe tidbit comes from a grizzled old farmer who swears that the birds have been targeting weak points in their equipment. They go for the hinges, he tells you seriously, pointing to a bent barn door. Not random. Strategic. You want to dismiss it. You do. But the soldiers are starting to look over their shoulders now, as if the enemy is watching and judging their every misstep. And maybe it is, because that night you're on guard duty, pacing the perimeter under a moonless sky. The wind sighs through the wheat. All is quiet until it isn't. Suddenly, a flurry of motion near the grain silo. You swing the flashlight just in time to catch a glimpse. 3 emus. Not running, not panicking, just standing there, watching. You blink, and they vanish into the dark. You try to tell yourself it's your imagination, or maybe just shadows playing tricks. But back at the fire, one of the soldiers is carving something into his rifle butt. You look closer. It's an emu, wearing a helmet. The jokes are getting darker. One guy starts calling Meredith Bird Commander. Another suggests putting the emus on the Australian coat of arms, because they've clearly earned it now. That idea, weirdly enough, isn't too far off. The emu already is on the Australian coat of arms, alongside the kangaroo, 2 animals chosen because they supposedly never move backward, symbolic of progress. You wonder briefly if the coat of arms should now depict a Lewis gun in the background, just to complete the picture. Historians still debate whether this entire operation was a doomed military exercise or an example of policy gone feral. Some argue it was a sincere, if poorly executed, attempt to help desperate farmers. Others call it government theater, something to keep the headlines full while subsidies lag behind. But to you, it just feels like trying to fight fog with a net, and the fog is winning. It's a week and a half in now, and even the birds seem to know the humans are losing. You wait to find a fresh set of emu tracks not 10 feet from your cot. Perfect, deep, 3-pronged impressions in the dust. They loop twice around the tent and then vanish into the brush. No feathers, no scat, just a signature, a calling card, like they wanted you to know they were there. Breakfast is silent. The usual clatter of mugs and half-hearted jokes is missing. Meredith doesn't even pretend to bark orders anymore. He just points vaguely at a map with one hand while sipping his tea with the other, his mustache twitching in slow defeat. Today's tactic? No more moving in convoys. The trucks are proving worse than useless, and the guns jam more than they fire. So instead, the squads will split into foot patrols, quietly shadow the birds, wait for them to stop, and then close the gap. You're assigned to one such patrol. You and 2 others, a soldier named Harris and a farmer named Bill whose beard seems to have absorbed his entire personality, move through the low scrub, slow and low, scanning the horizon for that telltale bobbing silhouette. It's exhausting work. The heat is unrelenting. The flies have unionized, and the wheat dust clings to your throat like chalk. You find yourself muttering under your breath, asking the birds politely to just stand still for once. Then you see them, maybe 24 birds grazing in a shallow hollow. This is your chance. You belly crawl into position, heart pounding. Harris sets the Lewis gun up on a rock. He whispers, "Ready." You nod. He fires. 3 birds go down. The rest erupt like confetti from a party cannon. They don't run in the same direction. They don't bunch together. They split, perfectly, into 3 groups, each zigzagging in a unique pattern through the trees. Harris curses. Bill throws his hat down and stomps it. You just lie there in the dust, watching the last bird disappear with an almost taunting grace, its neck stretching elegantly as it glides over the hill. Back at base, the new kill count goes up. Emus, 1,031. Rounds fired, 10,440. Meredith looks at the chalkboard, then slowly erases the last digit. "It's demoralizing," he says flatly, "if we can't even win mathematically." Here's your mainstream historical fact. In an official report submitted to Parliament, Meredith admitted that the emus displayed remarkable agility and endurance, and that it was difficult to gauge the effectiveness of gunfire due to the birds' tendency to scatter unpredictably. As for your fringe tidbit, a soldier in another patrol swears he saw an emu run in a perfect circle for 5 minutes, dodging every bullet, until the gun overheated and jammed, at which point the bird paused, looked directly at the gunner, and calmly walked away. Was it real? Who knows? But you'd believe anything at this point. The newspapers certainly do. Cartoons start appearing in the Sydney Morning Herald. One shows an emu wearing a general's uniform, peering through binoculars at a bumbling Australian soldier tangled in barbed wire. Another depicts a field report stamped with a giant emu claw. The public, sensing the absurdity, starts picking sides, and it isn't your side. By now, the operation has attracted nationwide attention. In Parliament, officials debate whether this whole thing is worth the embarrassment. Questions are asked. Eyebrows are raised. One MP allegedly mutters, "Are we at war with our own coat of arms?" You wander the edge of a field, watching another group of emus in the distance. They've taken to roosting along the ridgelines now, tall, dark, and ominous, like sentries at a fortress. There's something theatrical about it, as if they've read the papers too. You hear Bill behind you, mumbling. They don't care about fences, or guns, or laws. They just go. He spits in the dirt. Can't kill that kind of confidence. That night, the wind picks up. The canvas flaps. In the shadows, you see shapes, too many to count, drifting through the trees like ghosts on stilts. They don't make a sound, just move. Always moving, always watching. Historians still argue whether the bird's ability to scatter and regroup was learned behavior or simply instinct played at scale. Some insist the emus had no strategy. Others believe they were simply too adapted to the land, too Australian, to be beaten by outsiders with foreign hardware. You sit by the fire, chewing a bit of jerky, staring at the horizon, and in your exhaustion, your mind drifts to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the birds don't think they're at war at all. Maybe they just think you started it. The next morning, the air is thick with heat and failure. You wake to the sound of someone kicking a water drum, followed by a long, echoing groan, possibly human, possibly emu. At this point, who can say? Meredith calls for a general meeting, though meeting is a generous term for 12 dusty men standing in a loose circle, blinking at the sun like hungover kangaroos. He doesn't speak for a long time, just stares at the horizon. Then he clears his throat and says, "We're ending phase 1. There's a pause. Someone coughs. A soldier scratches at a sunburned elbow. "What happened to phase 2? Someone asks. Meredith lights a cigarette. There is no phase 2. It's official now. The government has decided to withdraw support. The operation has become a PR disaster. Members of Parliament are distancing themselves. Journalists are calling it the most absurd conflict in Commonwealth history. And the farmers, left with broken fences and chewed-up wheat, are starting to say things like, well, maybe we should have used kangaroos." Here's your historical fact. The Emu War was quietly suspended on November 8th, 1932, just days after it began. No victory was declared. No medals were awarded. No emu surrendered. Meredith is ordered back to Perth. The guns packed up like failed science projects. You help haul the crates into a truck, their metal edges still warm from the sun and shame. There's no ceremony, no handshake, just a vague muttering of, well, that was something. And then silence. The final kill count? Around 986 confirmed, give or take, with over 10,000 rounds expended. That's more than 10 bullets per bird, and those are only the confirmed casualties. Unconfirmed, anyone's guess. But the emus still rule the wheat belt. Back in town, things get weirdly festive. A few locals throw what they jokingly call a victory party, though no one's sure for whom. Someone paints a bird on the pub wall, holding a Lewis gun like a trophy. A farmer makes a sign. Welcome to Campion, home of the Emu Liberation Front. Your fringe tidbit for the day. Someone starts printing Emu War survivor badges. Ironically at first, but then they catch on. One guy tries to sell his at the railway station for £1. Another makes one for his dog. Even stranger, you hear that a group of schoolchildren in Perth voted to name their sports teams the Fighting Emus. Historians still argue whether the Emu War inspired this or if it was just a wonderfully timed coincidence. Either way, the name sticks. You linger around Campion for a few more days. The farmers go back to building fences and chasing birds with rakes. The emus, as if sensing the war is over, move less cautiously now. You see them in small groups, strutting across fields with the swagger of a species that just survived a military-grade extermination attempt. One afternoon, you spot a lone emu on a hilltop. It stands perfectly still in the wind, gazing over the wheat belt like it owns the place. Maybe it does. You think about the reports, the failed ambushes, the truck that couldn't keep up. You think about Harris and his bent rifle, Bill and his beard rage, Meredith and his slowly unraveling sense of purpose. You think about the sound of the gun jamming, again and again, as birds fled without so much as a backward glance. And then you laugh. Not a polite chuckle, not a defeated sigh, a real laugh, from somewhere deep in your ribs. Because now you get it. The war wasn't lost on the battlefield. It was lost the moment someone thought they could organize a war against birds. That night, around the campfire, someone passes around a harmonica and plays the saddest version of Waltzing Matilda you've ever heard. No one sings, but a few people hum along, out of rhythm, out of tune, and entirely in spirit. Then, out of the dark, comes that now familiar sound. Thrum, thrum, thrum. A group of emus moves through the edge of the field, not running, just walking, owning the moment. One of them stops and looks at you, and in that long pause, that quiet exchange across species, something strange happens. You salute it. It does not salute back. It does, however, poop in your general direction before sauntering off. The soldiers will leave tomorrow. The war is over. But out here in the wheat belt, the emus are just getting started. By the time you board the rail car back toward Perth, your boots are filled with dust, your pride is perforated like target practice, and your only souvenir is a crumpled ration tin that still smells faintly of gun oil and wheat biscuits. The ride is slow and bumpy. The other men, silent, hollow-eyed, stare out the windows at the rolling fields they were supposed to defend. You lean your head against the glass, watching the landscape blur past. Broken fences, trampled crops, and, in one distant field, what looks suspiciously like an emu doing a celebratory spin. Once in the city, you expect the humiliation to dissipate. It doesn't. The Emu War has already hit the papers in full farce. Headlines greet you with a chuckle. Feathered fiends foil firearms. Flightless foes fluster field forces. Emus 1, Army 0. You can't tell if the editors are angry or having the time of their lives. At a bar that night, someone buys you a drink and says, "You were out there, right? With the birds." You nod cautiously. He grins. Bloody legends, those emus. Gotta respect that kind of hustle. You're not sure how to respond, so you sip, and stare at the bottom of your glass like it might explain things. It doesn't. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Shortly after the military withdrawal, the government tried to spin the operation as a trial. Official language avoided words like defeat, failure, or foul uprising. Major Meredith, ever the reluctant face of the campaign, gave a final report noting the birds' exceptional mobility and unexpected resilience. In less official terms, he was probably thinking, they ran rings around us. Your fringe tidbit arrives in the form of a postcard. Someone slides across the bar. It reads, Emu War Hero, send feed. No signature, just a crude drawing of a bird perched on a Lewis gun like a throne. You flip it over. On the back, someone has scrawled, next time, use turrets. You don't laugh. You can't. The wound's still fresh. Meanwhile, the farmers are still on their own. Some try fences. Others try bounties. Still others swear by wild inventions. Scarecrows soaked in eucalyptus oil. Radio speakers playing fox calls. Even a rumor about someone using bagpipes. Spoiler alert, the emus are not impressed. Back in Parliament, debates heat up over compensation. Not for the soldiers, mind you, but for the wheat losses. Government subsidies are reinstated. Too little and too late. The farmers grumble, the birds eat, and life goes on. But here's where the story takes a strange turn. A few months later, January 1933, the emus are back, in even greater numbers. The farmers, desperate and a bit vengeful, write again to the government. Send the army, they say. Finish what you started. And you know what? They do. Phase 2 begins quietly, without press, without fanfare. Meredith returns, stoically, perhaps reluctantly. And this time, things are slightly different. The team is smaller, more experienced. The tactics, sharper. And somehow it works. A bit. They stop announcing their movements. They fire in shorter bursts. They actually wait for the birds to slow down before engaging. Over a few weeks, over 900 emus are taken down. By the end of the second campaign, the kill count exceeds 2,500. A more efficient war, if you can call it that. But by then, public interest has moved on. The Emu War becomes the punchline to a joke only half remembered. A strange blip in Australian history. Historians still argue whether Phase 2 should count as a separate campaign, or a grudging footnote tacked onto a ridiculous legacy. Some claim it was a success. Others say the damage was already done. The emus had already won the narrative. You return to the bush a year later, long after the last gun has cooled. Just to see. You walk the old paths, now half swallowed by grass. You find a ridge where you first saw 100 birds scatter like a storm. The wind hasn't changed. Neither have the birds. They're still out there. Quiet, elusive, watching. You sit on a rock near the old Campion field and eat a sandwich wrapped in newspaper. One emu wanders into view, then another. They pass you without so much as a nod, utterly uninterested in your presence. You're no longer a threat, just another part of the landscape. And for the first time, that feels right. The war is over. But the emus? They're still marching. You head back to Campion not as a soldier, not even as a spotter, but as something stranger. An unofficial historian of the most ridiculous military campaign in the Commonwealth's history. The train lets you off at a stop that's barely a platform. Just a signpost, some overgrown weeds, and the faint scent of rust and wheat. You shoulder your bag and head toward the old fields. They haven't changed much. Fences lean at awkward angles. The scrub is thick as ever, and the sky yawns overhead in that endless outback way. There's a new generation of farmers here now. Most were children during the Emu War. They don't talk about it much, just shake their heads, grin, and say things like, "Ah, the birds were hungry, and we were slow." It's become part of the folklore. The kind of thing you don't explain to outsiders, because they wouldn't believe it anyway. You meet an old-timer near a windmill who claims he still has shrapnel from a Lewis gun stuck in his shed wall. "Bird came right through the fence," he says, nodding seriously. "Didn't blink, like a feathered tank." You ask him how many birds are still out here. He just points. You follow his finger to the edge of a far paddock, and there they are, at least a dozen emus, bobbing gently through the wheat like ships on a quiet ocean. Calm, slow, absolutely unbothered. And here's your mainstream historical fact. The Emu War became such a well-known embarrassment that it was debated in international military circles, often cited politely, as a cautionary tale in the risks of engaging wildlife with formal force. Even Winston Churchill, when told about it years later, reportedly chuckled and said something along the lines of, "Well, at least they didn't lose to armed birds." He wasn't entirely wrong. You walk the length of the old ambush site near Campion, now overgrown and quiet. Someone's placed a small wooden sign there. No plaque, no ceremony, just the words, "Emu War Zone." We lost carved into it with a pocket knife. You smile. Fringe tidbit. A farmer nearby swears there's a specific emu that's been around for 20 years. He calls it General Featherbottom, claims it has a scar on one leg, and likes to stare directly at humans until they back away. No one's gotten close. Too clever, the farmer says. Knows where the traps are. Knows where we are. Back in town, you visit the local pub. The bartender, clearly having heard every emu joke under the sun, just grins when you order and says, "Soldier or sympathizer?" You shrug. Bit of both. On the wall behind him is a framed cartoon of an emu standing atop a pile of machine guns. Beneath it reads, "Let them come." You overhear a younger man, probably no older than 20, talking about a recent incident where emus once again decimated a whole field in under an hour. They moved like clockwork, he says. Even spooked the dog. Left nothing behind but tracks and feathers. Historians still argue whether the Emu War had any lasting impact on agricultural policy. Some say it accelerated government support for rural farmers. Others argue it just proved how disconnected officials were from the land. But all agree on one thing. The emus never left. That night, you camp out under the stars just beyond the fields. The sky blazes with more stars than you remembered. Somewhere nearby, a group of birds calls out, deep, resonant booms that echo across the plain. It sounds like laughter, or warning, or both. You drift to sleep thinking of the absurdity of it all. Lewis guns mounted on trucks, tactical maps pinned to hay bales, military reports detailing the behavior of birds. It shouldn't have happened, and yet you're glad it did, because in all its ridiculousness, the Emu War revealed something oddly beautiful about Australia. Its land, its creatures, its people, the stubbornness, the ingenuity, the refusal to admit defeat even when being completely and featheredly outclassed. In the distance, you see movement. A silhouette glides across the ridge, then another. Tall, elegant, powerful. You sit up slightly, watching as they pass like shadows in slow parade. You don't raise a rifle. You raise your flask. To the victors. The next morning, dew clings to your boots, and the scent of eucalyptus drifts through the air like a memory you didn't know you had. You stand, stretch, and look out over the empty field where 100 emus once ran rings around train gunners. The silence is thick, but not lonely, just observant. You make your way toward the old supply depot, now long abandoned. The building is crumbling around the edges, roof half caved in, rust climbing the walls like ivy. Inside, you find a few leftover crates, rotted rope, and somehow, a single, dented helmet still hanging on a nail. You lift it off gently. It's too small for you. But then again, maybe it wasn't made for humans anymore. Someone's written across it in charcoal. Try again. Here's your mainstream historical fact. After the final military withdrawal in late 1932, the government opted for bounty systems instead of formal campaigns. From 1934 onward, thousands of emus were killed annually by farmers who received payments per head. It was a crude solution, but unlike the Army's approach, it actually worked, at least in numbers. You walk through the depot, the echo of your steps a soft counter-rhythm to the steady rustling of wind through dry grass. Outside, an emu watches you from a distance. Its head bobs once. Then it disappears into the underbrush like mist. You begin to realize something quiet but undeniable. This wasn't just a failed campaign. It was a brief moment when humans, so used to conquest and control, met a wall of evolutionary brilliance and bounced off it with cartoonish force. The birds didn't win with claws or cunning. They won by being exactly what they are, perfectly adapted, absurdly fast, and utterly indifferent to the fragile egos of men. Quirky tidbit for today. There's a mural in Fremantle now, spray-painted across the side of an old fish and tackle shop. It shows a soldier asleep against a Lewis gun, while a line of emus tiptoe past in single file, each one wearing a little army helmet. Above it, in huge painted letters, "Never forget." Locals take selfies in front of it. Tourists laugh. Kids ask their parents if the emus really beat the army. The parents pause, and most of them just say, yes. Yes, they did. Historians still argue whether the whole thing should be taught in schools. Some say it trivializes war. Others say it's the perfect lens for understanding colonialism, rural struggle, and government overreach, all feathered into one ridiculous, unforgettable story. You return to Campion one last time that evening. No mission, no orders, just closure. The light is low and golden, painting everything in a warm blur. A few birds move through the fields at a distance. You recognize one by its limp, maybe the same from the early days. Maybe not, but something in you wants to believe it is. You sit on an old crate near the fence and eat the last of your rations. The wheat rustles. A shadow moves. Then, from behind a rock, rises a small emu chick, fluffy, unsure, eyes wide as it takes in your presence. You freeze. It blinks. You blink. Then it turns and waddles away, disappearing into the brush after its parent, who waits patiently a few meters off. No panic. No threat. Just a passing moment between adversaries who no longer remember why they fought. You whisper after them. You win. And somehow, you swear the wind answers back. We know. You stand, dust off your coat, and begin the long walk back. The road to Perth stretches ahead, winding and cracked, flanked by empty fields and faint laughter carried on the breeze. And somewhere behind you, the birds are still walking, still running, still out there. Not enemies, not allies, just emus. You don't go straight back to the city. Not yet. Instead, you take a detour to a place whispered about during the war, but never officially marked on any map. Locals called it the Dead Gun Hollow, an old ravine where one of the machine guns was dragged after jamming for the third time in a day and, in a fit of heat stroke and righteous fury, tossed off a cliff by two very tired soldiers. It takes hours to find, and the track is mostly gone now, overtaken by wild grass and stubborn trees. But eventually you crest a ridge and look down into a long, narrow gully. You squint. There, a patch of rusted metal, just barely visible under a blanket of leaves and vines. You slide down carefully. A few startled wallabies scatter. You brush away some of the greenery, and sure enough, there it is. The remains of a Lewis gun. Split barrel. Bent tripod. A relic of a war no one wants to remember, but no one quite forgets. You kneel beside it, run your fingers along its cool, crumbling edge, and chuckle. Should have used slingshots. You pull out your notebook. Yes, you've started carrying one now, and scribble a few lines. Not for a report, not for history books, just for yourself. Something like, here lies the last weapon to underestimate a bird. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Australia never again deployed military resources against its native wildlife in such a direct, combative way. Instead, they leaned into ecological science, land management, and, eventually, controlled culling. The Emu War was a singular, spectacular exception to an otherwise practical history of pest control. A fringe tidbit: a folklorist in the 80s recorded a claim from a farmer who said that during the war, some emus learned to listen for the sound of the gun bolt being pulled back, and would scatter at that exact moment. Smart little devils, he muttered, started running before the first shot. You sit for a while longer in the hollow, letting the wind stir your thoughts. The idea that these creatures, flightless, awkward, almost cartoonish, could outmatch human planning, weaponry, and pride isn't just funny anymore. It's beautiful. Because what's more human than losing to something you didn't respect enough? You climb back out of the ravine, heading toward a place the maps still call No Man's Flat. During the war, it was a site of multiple failed ambushes. Now it's just open land again. Quiet. Still, there's a small wooden bench set into the hillside, a newer addition. A plaque on it reads, "In memory of those who fought valiantly, and the birds who didn't care." You sit. You smile. Nearby, a group of emus moves across the field in a lazy arc, stopping now and then to peck at the soil. One pauses, looks up, then continues. You're not a threat anymore. Just a visitor. A ghost from a past they've already forgotten. Historians still argue over who won the Emu War. Militarily? No question. The emus dominated the open terrain. Politically? The government limped away, red-faced but determined to pretend it had been a test. Emotionally? Well, you tell me. Because you're the one still thinking about it. Still watching the birds drift through the dry heat, like feathered myths. Still wondering what lesson, if any, was ever learned. That night, you camp again. This time under a canopy of stars so thick they feel painted on. The Milky Way arcs overhead, and you lie back with your hands behind your head, listening to the sounds of the bush. Insects, wind, the occasional rustle of feathers, and in the deep silence that follows, you think not of battles, but of balance. Maybe the emus weren't the enemy. Maybe they were the mirror. By now, you're no longer counting the days. They just blur, dusty sunrises, slow walks through fields of memory, silent exchanges with the occasional bird who doesn't quite flee, but doesn't quite trust you either. Fair. You find yourself drawn to the old Campion town site again. What's left of it, anyway? A rusted sign leans against a crumbling wall. The church is roofless. The school is nothing but foundation stones. There's a general store with half its shelves still intact, filled with empty jars and the brittle ghosts of canned goods long devoured by time. The post office door creaks, open with a soft push. Inside, tucked behind a counter, is a bulletin board. Yellowed notices still cling there. Wanted ads, weather warnings, grain price updates. One flyer catches your eye. Faded ink, but still legible. Wanted. Men to assist with emu drive, paid per bird. Bioammunition. You trace the edges of the page with one finger. The corner tears slightly. It's as fragile as the plan it once represented. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Despite the government's claims that the Emu War was a temporary experiment, the incident echoed far beyond 1932. It became a source of cultural satire, historical lectures, military training anecdotes, and eventually, long after its last shot, a symbol of humility in the face of absurdity. Outside the post office, you find an old stone, likely part of the original town marker. Someone spray-painted across it in careful white script. They came. They saw. They ran fast enough. And honestly, that might be the most accurate summary ever written. You climb the nearby ridge, where Meredith once stood with his spotting glass, shouting directions at soldiers already too far behind the birds to matter. The view is still remarkable, miles of open wheat belt stretching to the horizon. You imagine the sound of gunfire echoing across that emptiness. And then, shortly after, the thrum-thrum-thrum of 1,000 feet pounding in perfect escape. Fringe tidbit. A veteran of the campaign once claimed in a radio interview that an emu stole his canteen while he was reloading. Walked right up, didn't break stride, yanked it off the hook with its beak, and took off like it knew I was too stunned to shoot. When asked if he fired anyway, he replied, "Mate, I saluted." You laugh out loud just remembering it. The sound startles a nearby lizard, which bolts into the brush like a mini dinosaur. You nod to it. You would have done great out here, too. It's getting near dusk again. The air smells of eucalyptus and dust and something older, something like acceptance. You lie back against the warm rock, arms folded under your head, and watch the sky go orange to rose to deep indigo. Historians still argue whether Australia learned anything from the Emu War. Some say it taught humility. Others say it taught paperwork. But out here, alone with the birds and the ghosts of a town half-eaten by time, you think the truth is simpler. It taught people how to stop assuming they could control everything, to stop underestimating nature, to stop writing checks with government letterheads that the land itself refused to cash. And maybe, just maybe, it taught someone somewhere to laugh a little sooner when everything goes completely sideways. You rise slowly, dusting off your back. The wheat moves like water below you. A few birds are already threading their way along the edge of the horizon. Graceful, undisturbed, indifferent. You raise your hand in a half wave. One pauses for just a second, then continues walking. You wake with the dawn again, this time not under canvas or beside a smoking cook fire, but beneath the low limbs of a gum tree. The bark peels and curls above your head, and the morning light filters through it in strips, like the bars of a very lazy jail. For a moment, you forget where you are. Then a low boom echoes across the plain. You sit up fast, alert, tense, only to realize it's not gunfire, just an emu call. Deep, rhythmic, resonant as a slow drum. You chuckle. It's been weeks since you last heard a real shot fired. But the birds? Still talking, still marching. You boil some tea over a sputtering fire and flip open your notebook again. It's nearly full now. Sketches of the landscape, quotes from the soldiers, half-legible field maps. A whole page dedicated to strange things emus did that no one believed, like the one that danced near a trench before vanishing, or the 3 that ran figure eights around a team until the gunner threw up. You write one more line. It was never a war. It was a misunderstanding with consequences. Today, you hike out to the edge of the old number 4 paddock, a place whispered about even during the war as the worst of all assignments. Flat, dry, exposed. More bullets were fired there than anywhere else. More birds got away. You find rusted casings scattered in the dirt like ancient seeds. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the years following the Emu War, farmers relied almost entirely on fencing and bounty systems, with limited military involvement. A 1934 bounty program reportedly resulted in 57,000 emus being culled in 6 months. It was effective, if less dramatic, and it quietly replaced the chaos of national intervention. But what replaced the story? That's the thing. You can solve a problem, but you can't always erase its legend. You find a cairn someone's built, maybe kids, maybe an old-timer with a sense of humor. It's stacked rocks with a feather poking from the top, and a bottle cap nailed to the front like a badge. You laugh. Then you hear it, a slow rustle behind you. Not alarmed, not rushed. You turn and there it is, a single emu, not close enough to touch, but close enough to see clearly. It's tall, taller than you remember. It tilts its head slightly, assessing you, not with fear, but something closer to curiosity. The two of you stare for a while. Then slowly, the emu lowers itself to the ground, legs folding beneath it. It sits, right there. You sit too. The wind picks up, blowing dust in lazy eddies around your boots. A crow caws in the distance. The sun climbs higher. And for the first time in this entire long, strange story, you're not trying to outwit the emus. You're just with them. Fringe tidbit. There's a painting tucked away in the War Memorial Archives, never publicly displayed. It shows 2 soldiers, bone-tired, sitting in a field beside an emu. No guns, no hats. Just 3 creatures under a wide Australian sky. The artist never titled it, but penciled on the back are 3 words. We were guests. Historians still argue over whether the Emu War deserves its place in official record. It's often treated as an amusing oddity, tucked between real conflicts. But for those who lived it, those who chased, who planned, who failed, it wasn't just absurd. It was humbling. You and the emu share that strange silence until it rises again, stretches, and walks away without a backward glance. No drama, no need for applause. You don't follow. You just sit there for a while longer, warmed by the sun and the weight of everything that didn't quite make sense, but somehow mattered anyway. The wind carries the sound of its steps long after it's gone. Later that day, you find yourself standing on the last stretch of road out of Campion. It's barely more than a dirt ribbon now, flanked by sun-bleached grass and the occasional defiant sapling trying its luck in the arid soil. Your boots sink a little with each step, slow, deliberate, like you're walking out of a dream. And maybe you are. There's no grand farewell, no banner that says thank you for surviving the Emu War, no brass band to play you off into legend. Just the breeze, the heat, and a single emu watching you from behind a strand of tall, dry bush. You nod to it. It doesn't nod back, but it doesn't run either. And in a story that began with panic and flight, that feels like progress. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. The Emu War eventually became part of military training lore, not for its victories, but as a textbook example of logistical missteps, overconfidence, and the hazards of deploying hardware where it doesn't belong. Cadets laugh, but commanders don't forget. The Australian military never tried a direct assault on birds again. They also learned to ask better questions. You pass a rusted-out signpost tilted at a crooked angle. It used to say Campion, wheat belt country. Now someone has added a hand-painted board beneath it. Bird country now. You don't argue. In the distance, you hear what could be a train whistle, or maybe just the wind playing tricks again. Either way, it's a reminder that the world is still moving, with or without your little corner of absurd history. Fringe tidbit. Some say there's an old family out near Lake Brown that keeps an Emu War on a roll in their shed, names of the soldiers who fought, and also the names they gave to the birds they encountered. Sergeant Peck, Big Harold, that bastard in the bush. The kids recite them like bedtime stories, and maybe they should, because historians still argue what really happened here. Was it a farce? A fiasco? An ecological parable dressed as military comedy? But you've stopped asking. You've lived it. You've seen the guns jam and the birds glide. You've watched trained marksmen bested by legs that moved like springs and instincts honed over millennia. You've heard soldiers curse and farmers laugh, and birds boom like bush drums at sunset. You've walked the empty fields, eaten beside old fences, and shared silence with creatures who never once needed your permission to exist. And so, you reach the train station, a bare platform with a cracked bench and a sign that reads, simply, Departures. You sit down, not because you're tired, but because it's the first place in weeks that feels like it wants you to sit. In the distance, an emu crosses the track. Just one. No hurry. No fear. It pauses in the middle, turns once, just enough that you can see its eye catch the light, and then continues walking toward whatever comes next. No medals. No surrender. Just footsteps and dust. So now, as the sun sinks low and the last golden threads of light stretch lazily across the horizon, you feel the whole story begin to settle. Not just in your memory, but in your muscles, your breath, your heartbeat. The war is over. The birds are still out there, sure, forever wandering, forever watching, but the weight of it all grows lighter now, like feathers in the wind. The chaos fades. The noise softens. You're not out there in the bush anymore. You're not standing beside a jam machine gun or chasing shadows across dry fields. You're here, now, and the only sound is the hush of the world wrapping you gently in its arms. Maybe you imagine the faint rustle of wings beyond your window. Maybe it's just a breeze. Maybe it's just your thoughts, drifting like emus across your own wide-open sky. Let yourself go with them. Let your body sink just a little deeper into rest, your limbs heavy, but at peace. Let your eyes close slowly, soft as twilight on a wheat field, and let the silence carry you. The war is done. The world is still turning. And you're safe. You're warm. You're exactly where you need to be. Sweet dreams.